You're listening to Stealing from Wizards, Volume 3, Kidnapping, by R.A. Consul.
Chapter 27, Winds of Change. "I can't see where we're going," said Marie, struggling to keep up with the pace Kuro was setting. "Neither can I," said Kuro. "It makes us harder to follow." "How do you know when to turn?" she asked, as she was yanked sideways down a corridor. "Just follow the wind. She's showing us where to go." "What wind?" Marie asked. Her old memories hadn't completely taken root yet, as her accent bounced around on almost every sentence. "There's no wind down here." "Oh, for goodness sake," Kuro muttered. "Look, I've missed you too, but could you please blow on Marie?" He got an indignant blast in his face for the request. "Oh, come on. You've been blowing on her all year. You've been helping her to learn to fly. She's as much your friend now as mine." "Who are you talking to?" asked Marie. "The west wind," said Kuro. "She's been a little clingy since we got back together." "Are you dating the wind?" "Is that something that makes sense to me? I don't think I have all my memories back." "It's complicated," said Kuro. It wasn't a good time to explain the relationship. They had important escaping to get on with. "We really need to figure out how to get out of here." "Can't we get out the way you got in?" Kuro was glad she couldn't see the look of shame on his face. His plan to free Marie had been pretty effective, but that exit was now blocked by a quantity of rats he did not wish to contemplate. Sorry, no. I don't suppose you know how to shut down the palace security." "Of course I do not know how to turn off the security. Why would you—"
"Oh, wait a minute. Yes, I do. I was there when you turned it on. I'm terribly sorry. My thoughts are quite muddled."
"It's as though I have two sets competing for space." "Great. How do we do it?" asked Kuro.
"The controls are in the Regent's office," said Marie.
"In the tall tower?" groaned Kuro. "All right, this way then."
"Oh, goodness, I feel her now,"
said Marie as she followed Kuro without needing to be directed. "She is a little bit pushy." Kuro had to assume that the wind's pushiness was intentional, but he wasn't about to start an argument with her about it. She was helping. That was already more than he could reasonably ask of her. It wasn't as though he could offer much more than gratitude in return. They clambered out of the labyrinth near the knight's quarters, and squinted against even the dim lights that filled the hall. They ran through the room containing the round table and counterfeit Excalibur to the grand entrance hall, where they began to climb. Even with the encouragement of the wind, the climb was arduous. Around and around, up endless flights of stairs to the Regent's chambers. "The door is locked," Marie announced as she slammed herself against it. "Only from the outside," said Kuro. "I'll be right back." A small window burst from its frame and Kuro hopped out. Dangling by one hand from a windowsill, hundreds of feet above the ground, Kuro felt an overwhelming sense of joy. It was the only joy he'd been allowed in his previous life, and it had been stolen from him in exchange for being allowed to keep his new one. He had accepted the exchange, but now that he had it back, he wasn't certain he'd ever be able to give it up again. He swung back and forth, then launched himself into the open air, confident his companion would carry him, catch him, and set him down safely. His fingers caught the railing to the Regent's balcony firmly, though he struggled more to pull himself up than he'd expected. A year spent ground-bound had softened him, but not so much that he couldn't clamber over. His acrobatics went unnoticed by the crowds, because they were distracted by the mortal combat on display below. The duel between Sir Bors and Lady Ayn had left the confines of the palace, and was raging in the courtyard. Every moment of their battle was magnified and rendered in flower petals above the dueling pair, while their fellow knights, and most of the population of New Camelot, looked on from outside the barrier. Kuro dashed through the Regent's chamber, still giddy from his brief flight, and unlatched the door. "After you, your majesty?" Kuro bowed as Marie passed.
"As you were,"
she said dismissively, as she swept past him with royal grace, and then noticed what she was doing and cringed. "Where did that come from? Oh, I don't like that at all." That dragged Kuro back into the moment. "Where's the off switch?"
"In here."
Marie pushed a painting of a knight riding a dragon upward and slid it away to reveal a dazzling array of runes. I don't really remember what you had to do to turn it on, she said. The enchantment was beyond complicated. It made the runes on Kuro's bracelet look like the scrawlings of a toddler. He recognized some of the symbols, but it would take hours to even begin deciphering it. The sound of footsteps on the stairs informed them they would not have the time needed to make a thorough study. Marie ran to the door and slammed it closed. A pathetic barrier, given the person climbing the stairs likely had the key and more magic than either of them. You're a burglar? Aren't you good at these kinds of things? In his experience, the best way to deal with a fancy and expensive magical security system was to rob somebody else. He was aware of techniques, however, that might, possibly, be effective in this situation. He rummaged in his bag for an appropriate tool. Get your wings on, he said. Whether this works or not, we're leaving from the balcony. She began to cast. Feathers sprouted from her back, glowing purple at first like the royal robes, then fading to black as they solidified. Meanwhile, Kuro found the implement he'd been looking for. He withdrew the sword. It was elegant yet simple. The narrow blade, almost as long as Kuro was tall, hummed with anticipation of use. You stole Excalibur? Marie accused. How did you? When did you? I grabbed it on our way past the round table, said Kuro, as he wound up to swing it. I thought it might be useful. The elaborate and powerful series of enchantments intended to keep people from entering the palace were not designed to withstand an assault from someone already inside. The security controls reacted very poorly to having Excalibur embedded inside them, which resulted in Kuro having a rapid and forceful interaction with the opposite wall. The last thing anyone wants after hitting their head is to have someone shout at them. And yet someone was doing quite a lot of that. Kuro could barely make it out over the ringing in his ears, though, and trying to get his eyes to both look in the same direction resulted in skull-splitting pain. He also felt as though he'd lost quite a bit of time and a lot of context in the impact. Get up! Was repeated several times. He didn't want to. He wanted to keep his eyes closed and sleep until it didn't hurt anymore. The very notion of movement nauseated him, which made the fact that he was being roughly dragged somewhere an absolute nightmare. He protested weakly, but his demands were countered. Wind, Kuro! We need the wind! Please, Kuro! That request was much gentler, but the brief reprieve was ended with a cry of, He's here! That announcement was in turn followed by the excruciating noise of slamming doors and a very angry-sounding man shouting far too loudly about the mess they had made of his office. He felt arms wrap around his chest and was pulled backwards into empty space. Plummeting earthwards helped shake some of the fog from Kuro's brain. There was something unambiguous about mortal peril that helped focus the senses. They were falling. Marie had pulled him off the balcony with her, and was trying to get her wings to carry them both to safety. It was not working very well. She had just learned to glide on her own and under controlled circumstances. This was not a natural next step in the learning process. Their almost vertical plummet explained her previous request for more wind. A request from Kuro for an updraft was enthusiastically fulfilled. Marie caught the wind and leveled out, but only barely, achieving a speed and trajectory that would lead to a painfully extended rather than instant demise. Let me go, shouted Kuro. Without him, she might gain control, and he could probably land softly enough to survive. He wasn't certain she could hear him over the rushing wind, though. If anything, her grip tightened. He plunged his hand into his satchel and withdrew the umbrella. Even holding it with two hands, he nearly lost his grip on it as it snapped open. The added drag slowed their descent enough that their arrival on the ground could be generously called a landing. It wasn't by any means a safe landing, not only because of the clumsiness, but also that it occurred in the middle of an ongoing duel. The courtyard was full of the remnants of wizards at war. The formerly perfect gardens were twisted and scorched. The air reeked of lightning. Walls of ice steamed where they encountered streams of lava. Ein was stumbling from injury and exhaustion while Bors pressed her relentlessly. The older knight in black armor appeared like a hole in the world. He attacked with the zeal of certainty in the righteousness of his purpose, while Ayn struggled to defend herself. Not aiming to kill her opponent had weakened her position from the outset. The unanticipated entry of two teenagers into the field provided a reprieve for Lady Ayn, as Bors redirected his energy.
"Get away from the Queen, you scoundrel!"
the Black Knight bellowed, as he stormed over to protect his fallen sovereign. To encourage compliance, he directed a gout of flame towards Kuro, not considering for a moment that his new queen might not want her friend reduced to a pile of ash. Marie, who, like most wizards, had no experience at all with battle magic, resorted to Blandland's combat methods to defend Kuro. While her attempted tackle did little to move the large and heavily armored knight, it did succeed in startling him enough to allow Kuro time to dive for cover before he was engulfed by fire. He rolled behind a twisted mass of glass, the remnant of a contest between earth and flame earlier in the duel. It was too narrow to fully hide him. He shielded himself with his umbrella and braced for the incoming flames to singe his shoulders. But heat never came.
"McCool!"
snarled Sir Bors.
"You would side with these traitors?"
Peeking around his umbrella, Kuro could see the gleaming copper from Sir Craigleith McCool in full armor. Destroying the controls had worked. The palace defenses had fallen, and the other Knights of the Sun were joining the battle. McCool stood, shield raised between the Black Knight and Kuro, having just absorbed the fiery blast. "You know, mate, I'm not convinced they are," he said, "and I'm not keen on letting this little weasel get incinerated until I am." Ayn limped up to join McCool in facing off against Bors. "If you would just listen." Clearly he would not.
"I will not lose another queen,"
he said. The iron stubbornness in his voice betrayed the trauma of the coup d'etat. His refusal to listen made no sense other than as an attempt to fend off the years of shame over failing to protect the royalty by doing so now, or at the very least, die trying. He pushed Marie behind him, ignoring her protests. He was not alone. The other 5 knights joined him, forming an impenetrable barrier of magical metal around their new queen. Some raised sword and shield, others readied spells to unleash doom on anyone who would dare approach their sovereign. The knights, distracted by shouting at each other, did not notice the regent floating down from his tower chambers on winged slippers. He appeared unbothered by the destruction in the courtyard, or the several armed and armored knights ready to enact terrible violence. It was difficult to tell under the thick beard, but he seemed to be enjoying the display. He showed no hint of fury about the destruction of his chambers, and instead had a look of a man who held a winning hand of cards. "Stand down, knights!" screamed Marie, expertly imitating royal fury.
"You don't know what you're saying,"
said Bors.
"You are in terrible danger."
"Not from them, I'm not," said Marie. "It's the regent. He's the traitor."
"Lord Almanactus is your most faithful retainer,"
said Sir Bors.
"That thief has filled your mind with poison."
"No, that was Phineas Hearn," said Marie, startling the knights around her with her invocation of that name. "And the regent let him. They kidnapped me and filled my head with ideas about being queen and wanting to start a war with the West. This isn't even my real accent. I'm a Blandlander from Montreal. Kuro is rescuing me."
"Your Majesty seems confused,"
said the regent, finally making his presence known to all. He spoke in a calm and soothing manner.
"Of course she would wish to believe her associate from the Academy is of good character. Come, let us all go inside where it is safer and discuss this in a more civilized manner." "Absolutely not," said Marie. "Knights, protect me from the regent." The only 2 who obeyed immediately were Ayn and McCool, who both turned to face off against the withered old man. The others shifted, filled with uncertainty. "Whom do you serve?" she demanded. "If I am your queen, then defend me. If I am not, then I am nothing to you, so release me." That logic was powerful enough for the 5 knights around her to shift their attention away from their previous opponents and toward the doddering old man in his silk slippers and billowing robes. "Your Majesty, you malign my character,"
he said, bowing to Marie.
For one, you are undoubtedly the queen, as none other could have opened the vault. Additionally, I did not let Phineas Hearn meddle with your mind. I made him do it. From your behavior, I worry his work was a bit slapdash. He serves me just as these knights do.
Palmanactus, what are you saying?
Shouted Sir Bors. The knights were slow to understand the regent, although their swords were starting to turn more threateningly in his direction. 7 of the most dangerous people in the kingdom, preparing to attack, did not seem to bother the man in the slightest. The regent pulled up the sleeves on his robes slightly to reveal golden wristbands. They were unremarkable to the uninformed, but the knights recognized them immediately as the royal armor. Claudius Roche, in the body of the regent of Tirnanog, laughed as the dragon plate, worn only by kings and queens of the country for generations, poured over him like liquid gold. It solidified into clawed gauntlets, scaled plates, bat-like wings, and a horned helmet. Even with his excessive beard protruding ridiculously from the visor, he appeared beautiful and imposing.
Kneel,
he commanded. The knights obeyed. Each dropped to one knee and bowed their head to the bearer of the royal armor.
It's always important to have a backup plan,
Roche said, now directing his comments to Kuro, as if he were delivering an important lesson.
The armors of the Knights of the Sun must obey their master. You interceded just a little too late to prevent my ultimate victory here, my dear boy. Well played regardless. Perhaps we'll have another match someday.
He leapt, and the wings on the armor carried him easily across the courtyard. He slammed down in front of Marie.
Apologies, Your Majesty, but I still have uses for you.
The kneeling knights hurled what minor spells they could muster without moving, but they bounced harmlessly off the finest armor in the realm. Their pathetic assault only made Roche giggle. What he found less amusing was being struck in the head by a flying unicorn. Soaring in with the sun behind her, Henrietta, with Charlie on her back, dove at the regent. Her horn glanced harmlessly off the royal armor, but the sheer mass of the animal knocked him sprawling. By the time he had regained his feet, Marie was on the unicorn's back. Charlie, sobbing openly from the terror of being in the air, spurred Henrietta skyward.
A noble gesture,
Roche saluted Charlie for her bravery,
but ultimately fruitless.
He spread his wings and gave chase. He vaulted skywards, propelled by the enormous strength conferred by his stolen suit of armor. However, he soon slammed back down to the ground even harder than he'd taken off. The west wind poured down with all her might, driving the man to his knees and forcing him to retract his wings.
Is this your doing, my boy?
He sounded proud, although the tone quickly turned grim.
If you involve yourself in the games, you take on the risks as well,
he threatened. His clawed golden gauntlet began to glow like the sun, building energy to vaporize Kuro. I don't think you want to do that, sir, said Kuro. The way he said it, factual and unthreatening, intrigued Roche enough to delay the fatal beam.
Why is that, my dear boy?
Because you might damage this, replied Kuro, holding up a book, the very one Roche had taken from the vault.
How?
Roche shouted. He didn't wait for an explanation, but charged towards Kuro, no longer interested in the escaping queen. The armor made him fast, but Kuro had the help of the west wind. She filled his umbrella and carried him across the courtyard towards the gates of the palace grounds. Even with all her strength carrying him forward, however, Roche was gaining on him.
Give that back,
said Roche, his tone implying that he had more to say. However, nobody heard it, for as he crossed the threshold to the palace grounds, sirens blared. Chains erupted from the ground and coiled around him, yanking his arms apart, forcing him to the ground, encasing his hands in steel and gagging him. He struggled against them, which only caused them to tighten, dragging him to his knees. I was hoping that would happen, said Kuro. I hid my anchor inside one of the Lamrak armor bracelets when you took them in the vault. It has an exploding enchantment that sets off the gate security. That's when I stole your book, too. Loose robes are pretty easy to pickpocket. Backup plans, right? Chained and gagged, Claudius Roche began to shake as if chuckling to himself. Then, Sir Bors stood and began walking towards them like a wind-up toy, guided by Roche's mental commands. Roche tilted his head. Even though his face was completely hidden behind the draconic visor, the gesture seemed to say, "Your move." Kuro grabbed the horns of the helmet and pulled, hoping to get to the circlet the Regent wore, the forgery he delivered. The helmet was immovable, the dragon plate being built to withstand much more than the strength of an undersized teenager. He had one last backup plan, the same one that had removed his bracelet. Kuro reached into the satchel and pulled out the bucket of salt he'd stolen from the kitchens. Recognizing it, Roche began to panic. Bors began to run as Roche thrashed and pulled, but the movement only made the magical chains hold him more tightly, pulling him almost flat against the ground. Kuro slammed the bucket of salt onto the helmet, the horns punching holes through the bottom. Suddenly, the man went limp and fell to the ground, the bucket full of salt still lodged on his helmet. The armor began to flow away, and Kuro worried that he'd killed him. Not wanting to take any risks, Kuro reached into the bucket and pulled the circlet off the man's head, just as he had done with his bracelet. Bors stopped advancing. The knights started rising to their feet. As he pulled the bucket away, circlet buried in its contents, the man in front of Kuro sputtered and spat. Then, while trying to blink away the salt around his eyes, he looked up at Kuro.
"Who are you? What is happening?"
he wheezed, as if he'd just woken up in an unexpected location. Looking skyward, Kuro saw Marie and Charlie astride Henrietta flying off. In the cafe across the square, Ms. Crawley, Marie's mother, Arthur, and Jack looked on, all of them alive and well. But perhaps not him. He had rescued his friend, that was all that mattered. But he had committed countless crimes to do so, many of them with witnesses. The royal guard would know their anchor had failed, and that the most well-protected places in the realm were not safe from him. Before the knights could collect themselves, before his many transgressions could be enumerated, and before the hounds had a chance to catch his scent, he caught the wind and vanished into the back alleys of the lower city.
Thank you for listening to Stealing from Wizards. If you liked our show, please consider rating or reviewing on iTunes. If you want to support this podcast or just can't wait for the next chapter, the full book is available on Amazon, Kobo, and Indigo. Our theme music was written by Camille Saint-Saëns, transcribed by Franz Liszt, performed by Rebecca Verdun, and used with permission. This episode was produced by Jim Tigwell.